when we started this process in Kisangani with a dear friend of mine, Mr. Fostanli Nyankula, who's from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. All we wanted to do was just to sing pretty songs, songs that made us feel good. But the deeper we went into the work, we were confronted with songs, stories of Omalume, the uncles who sit in parliament, in state houses, uncles that are making our lives rather difficult. We were confronted with stories of rooms, stories of broken circles. And I know that many of you do not understand the language that these stories are sometimes told in. But in isiZulu we say you cannot translate a language. So what we're going to try and do tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is we're going to attempt a pretty song. How's that? So, when I was growing up, we didn't have a TV, but we had a radio. And on the radio, there were these radio dramas that would come on. But there was this one that was really popular. And after every episode, there'd be this pretty song that would come on. And Sis Pumla would go, we're gonna do Sis Pumla's pretty song. Now the question is, who is this Sis Pumla? Huh? Can you tell me, Tazim, who is this Sis Pumla? Huh? Hey, boo. Hey. So it was 3 a.m. in the morning and Sis Pumla went straight to her kitchen. She boiled a pot of water, waited for it to boil beyond boiling point. Then she carefully picked it up, went to her bedroom where her darling husband, Henry, was sleeping with a brown blanket over his face, wearing some nasty old pajamas. Now you see, Sis Pumla hated the color brown, and Henry knew this. Now, Henry was a musician, a brilliant musician. And while studying at the University of Natal, he got himself a white girlfriend. Now, this white girlfriend once told him she said, Henry, you look so beautiful in the color brown, darling. So from that day onwards, Henry decided that the color brown would be his color. He would wear nothing else but the color brown, even in bed. Now this was a problem, you see, because this Pumla hated this color brown. She tried everything. She tried speaking to him, but no, he wouldn't have it. He was determined that the color brown was his color. So that morning, she baptized the bastard. Oh, in the name of the Father, the Son, the daughters and the color brown. Hey, in the name of the Father, the sons, the daughters and the color brown. In the name of the Father, the sons, the daughters and the color brown. And all of Sis Pumla's frustrations, she burned him with hot water, fled her house, and came to live with me. Hey, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, hey. Now, Sis Pumla could come and live with me, you see, because my house was an open house. Kind of like the Open Society Foundation, but not quite. You see, my mother believed in the name of Jesus. So she made sure that everybody who entered that house was treated with the utmost hospitality and respect. So we had to respect every single person that walked in. So the whole of Guamashu knew this, including Sis Pumla. So it was scary at times, like when that uncle from prison came to live with us. You know, something horrible happened, but hey, that's a story for another day. But it was also funny. But with Sis Pumla, it was always exciting, especially when we went to church. You know, she'd sing for Jesus, take the melody deep into her body, deep into her hips, all the way through to her vagina, because you see, Sis Pumla understood something, that Jesus lived everywhere. So she'd go deep into her body, deep into her hips, deep into her body. Hey, deep. Hey, deep, 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 deep. Hallelujah, deep. Hey, deep into her body. So, one morning we woke up and she decorated the whole house with pots. You see, there were pots underneath the tables, blue pots, yellow pots, white pots, flowery pots, empty pots, rotting pots, empty pots on top of the room divider. Everywhere there were pots, pots, pots. I never knew we had so many pots. And we became worried. We said, Mom, look, Mom, I think Sis Pumla should see somebody professional, because we've tried the water. We've tried the water. But it won't work. We've even tried the prayers. They seem to be taking longer than usual. So please, do something. So my parents took her to a social worker, because in those days we didn't know what a psychologist was, let alone afford one. There she was asked many questions about the color brown, her children, her husband Henry, and the white girlfriend. And amongst the many stories that she told, Sis Pumla told this story. My maternal great-great-great-grandfather and my maternal great-great-grandmother had an affair. You see, he was a white man, married man from Germany, and she was a black woman, married woman from Imondlo. And together with her family, they occupied the land that this man owned. They worked it. Are you listening to me? Yes. So they worked this land, you see. And then I often imagine them sneaking around, you know, going from place to place, trying to find spaces to make love. And then I wonder if he called her slave, and then I wonder if she called him boss. Now that couldn't have been, because you see, these two people were making love. So Sis Pumla spoke for days. She spoke for days and days and days and days and days and days, revealing all the trauma that was inside her. And by some chance, it so happened that the post-apartheid government was on a compensation spree. You see, they were compensating everything. There was the BEE, Black Economic Compensation. There was the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Compensation. There were all sorts of compensations. People living with AIDS compensations. Your child went to exile compensations. Compensations upon compensations, forgetting the most important compensation of all compensations, which is the land. But wait a minute, we won't go there today because it means we won't leave this city hall. You see, so Sis Pumla also got compensated. She got compensated for all the trauma, for the girlfriend, for the brown pots, the leaking pots, the dirty pots. But she downright refused it. She said, hell no. Ngeke ngithinta mina le mali. Ngiyothina uma belungu sebefuna imali yabo. Because you see, Sis Pumla knew something. She knew that black people would never own anything in this land of South Africa, not even their own bodies. Yeah! Yeah! What's that, Mantobazan? What's that, Mantobazan?
Welcome everybody. My name is Fatima Hassan. I'm the Executive Director of the Open Society Foundation for South Africa. I'm going to ask you to please put your phones on silent and to also just let all the performances flow and let all the messages flow. We'd really, really appreciate it. Thank you. I want to thank the South African Youth Choir, who did a beautiful rendition of our national anthem. They are a youth choir, as you could see, and they're based at the University of the Western Cape. And then I want to thank our performers tonight. This performance was in collaboration with the Arts Exchange at the Open Society Foundations, and it was called Not Another Diva. It was just an excerpt of a longer piece, which will be shown on Human Rights Day in Kailicha next year, to which you're all invited to. And the performers were Faustin Linyekula from the DRC, Shlengiwe Lushaba from South Africa, and the dancers were Johanna Shabalala and Apiwe Bashleni. I'm going to now call our board member, Professor Mary Metcalf, to officially welcome you to the 25 years of grant making in South Africa, Open Society Foundation's commemorative lecture. Now that's quite a mouthful, so the hashtag is just Open Society SA 25. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's my great privilege to, on behalf of the board of Open Society Foundation South Africa, and us on behalf of the whole of Open Society Foundations, to welcome everybody here tonight. So many people have come from so far. How many people are from Western Cape? Rest of South Africa? So we are welcoming the rest. Who's here from the rest of Africa? Let's welcome them. And let Africa welcome the rest of the world. I hope that in this wonderful evening, everybody is made to feel very special, because everybody here is very special. We are all part of a network of activists who believe in the values and practices of open society. That's why we're here. We come from multiple contexts, but we share a commitment to struggle so that those values and that those practices survive us, so that they flourish after we're gone, despite all of the threats that are there. So we're special, and tonight's also special. As OSF South Africa, we've had a wonderful 2 days. We've had a wonderful 2 days of intense debate, of listening to each other, of exploring ideas, many of which we may not even agree with, but we are listening and debating and testing ideas. And this immediate family of OSF has tonight said, come, Cape Town, come and be part of this debate. Because tonight belongs to everyone, belongs to all of us. And we're here to enjoy that solidarity and to say thank you to George Soros. I was very touched last night to hear Alexander speaking and to hear him talk about how he has embraced South Africa, about how formative in his thinking and in his life has been the contact with people such as Nelson Mandela and others. But this network of South African activists also embraces you. And we want to thank you for everything that you've done to build this community. We may not agree on everything, and I know that you're like that. But what we do agree on is that your philanthropy, which builds different views, which builds human agency, which commits to protecting the vulnerable, which is committed to fairness, which always rejects doctrinaire thinking, and which challenges vested interests, is alive and well in South Africa, and we thank you for that. So, your work and your philanthropy has created a network that goes beyond the institutions. It goes to all of the individuals in South Africa who will continue to fight for open society values. And there's one, I've been privileged to hear you speak often. But there's one particular thing I read about you that I've never forgotten, and I haven't ever heard anybody else refer to it, so I want to tell the story. It's a story that I read in one of your books where you were exhausted of the pressure and risk of gambling in the financial sector, but you already had tasted philanthropy and had developed a taste for it. And you made a decision that I thought was amazing, is that the financial success was motivated by a desire to accumulate in order to give it away. I think that's remarkable, and we thank you for that.
So, everybody's been waiting for this moment, I think. There's been lots of excitement that's been brewing in the last 2 months. Everybody wants to know who's going to receive a commemorative scholarship or fellowship award. And tonight, we're actually going to make the announcement. So it's really a privilege and an honor to call our Deputy Chairperson, Mary Jane Marifi, one of the first recipients of George Soros's philanthropy in 1979, when she was a young black student at the University of Cape Town, to actually make the announcement of the awards that we will be giving to mark 25 years of grant making in South Africa. Mary Jane.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Isn't it wonderful that even when Africa is sad, Africa sings? When Africa is happy, Africa sings. Even when Africa is angry, Africa sings. This is just how we do things around here, right? Now, I'm trying to fill in time because I want those who think that they are going to receive the awards today to feel even more anxious and wait for me to get to the announcements. But you are going to have to indulge me for a few more seconds before I announce the winners. When we were first discussing about how to celebrate the 25 years of George's philanthropy in South Africa, we looked for ideas of how do you pay tribute to such generosity. We thought it best to actually go back into history and look where it originated from. In 1979, George came to South Africa and set up a scholarship for black African students at the University of Cape Town. What started off as a scholarship fund for 80 students grew to a fund that was global, that covered more than and supported more than 15,000 scholars and 80 fellowships. It became a global initiative, but it also launched George's philanthropy, the Open Society Foundation. So we came up with the idea of the way to honor this and to pay tribute is to go back to where we began. So the idea emerged of setting up scholarships and fellowships to ensure that we give an opportunity to a cadre of young black leaders in civil society so that we ensure that we have leaders who will continue the work that George started, and that we will have people who will tirelessly defend the values of an open society. So, with the generous support and contribution from the network of open society foundations globally, and in particular the support and contribution from the Open Society Foundation's President's Office, I was very careful to ensure that I say the Open Society Foundation's President's Office. I didn't want you to mistake the President's Office for another President's Office. We're talking about this, the President of the Open Society Foundation's Office. So tonight, we proudly announce the winners from the two highly competitive applications and review process for both the scholarships and the fellowships. But before I do that, I know. Just a few more seconds, I promise. Before I do that, before I announce the winners formally, I'd like to introduce to you a new initiative that we decided to also start, a 3-year investigative journalism degree program, which is being launched in partnership with Wits University's The Open Society Fund's generosity knows no boundaries, right? So this investigative journalism degree program is launched in partnership with the University of the Witwatersrand's Department of Journalism and Media Studies and with Rhodes University's Department of Journalism. What we have decided to do is that we will have 15 fellows in investigative journalism, and these will be selected over a 3-year period, starting in 2019. And this is done to develop a cohort of Black investigative journalists in South Africa and in the region. They are not going to be announced today. They are not going to be announced today. We will start the program in 2019. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. But before I do that, no. No, I'm kidding. Our first awards will be made to our 5 Democracy Fellows. All 5 of the successful Democracy Fellows were selected by a robust review process, and their work will advance a body of work that is critically needed in South Africa as we head into the national elections in 2019. They will be hosted by the Democracy Works Foundation, a key partner of the Open Society Foundation for South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, help me to welcome the 2019 Democracy Fellows on stage. And they are Sithembile Mbete, come on up. The second Democracy Fellowship goes to Tasneem Esop. The third is Lukhona Mnguni. The fourth recipient is Naledi Mudise. Now, I said there were 5 fellows. Unfortunately, our 5th fellow, Nompumelelo Ranji, was unfortunately not able to make this evening. Please join me for a round of applause for our first 5 fellows. And may I ask Alexander Soros, the Deputy Chairman of the Global Open Society Foundation, to join me on stage. I'm sure he's not going to keep you waiting like I have, because he's got 20 to announce. Alex? Can't run away.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Dad, can you hear me? Okay, good. As Mary Jane said, these scholarships and fellowships commemorate my father's first major act of philanthropy, which began here in Cape Town nearly 4 decades ago. At that time, South Africa was the embodiment of a closed society. Due to apartheid, the overwhelming majority of South Africans had absolutely no rights, and even those who did have rights could pay with their lives if they tried to resist the regime. My father felt compelled to act, and he started by providing bursaries for 80 Black students to study at the University of Cape Town. His thinking was to empower and educate a group of Black South Africans to help undermine apartheid. This act was the beginning of a journey which eventually led to the creations of what today is the Open Society Foundations. Mary Jane was one of the first recipients of these bursaries back in 1979. And it was a gift and it was a gift that kept on giving in multiple ways, as she is now the Open Society Foundation for South Africa's Deputy Chair. I stand here as a proud son for the fact that Cape Town, South Africa is a place where my father's philanthropic ambition was first put into practice, and especially to try and undermine one of the most brutal regimes in recent memory. Since my father's first scholarships in South Africa, the Open Society Foundations have issued some 15,000 scholarships worldwide. The scholars we celebrate today were all nominated by former or current grantees, or as maybe we should say, partners. Their individual profiles and work reflect their deep commitment to improving the lives of the most marginalized in society. While there is no denying that South Africa and the region still face challenges, there are abundant reasons to be confident that things will progress. These young leaders who are committed to an open society are one of those very reasons. Drawn from applications from across the continent, these scholars we will announce shortly are the next generation of leaders and agents of change. To the Open Society Scholarship winners, congratulations and thank you for the work you do and the inspiration that you give us all today. I would now like the audience to pay attention to the screens as we will show a short film, after which the 20 scholarship winners will come on stage to be recognized formally. Thank you.
I am intrigued by the brilliance of these young people. I'm driven by this altruistic work to imbue them with the gift of education.
I was excited to be part of the Commemorative Scholarship panel because it feels like such a fitting way to commemorate 25 years of OSFSA and also to honor the philanthropy of George Soros.
Scholarship is, I think, is a great enabler. It does make a difference who generates, who creates knowledge, who owns knowledge.
It is really investing in change. It's about supporting, very progressive young activists, scholars through the scholarship. Talking to some of these candidates, I am so confident in the future of South Africa.
An open society, actually for me, one of the most beautiful things in our constitution is the preamble. We as South Africans, we lay a foundation of an open and democratic society.
As a fees must fallest, I know how difficult it can be not being able to pursue something that you want to. So scholarships like this, that have focus areas, first of all, are very important.
I love the law. Law is what binds society together. And also when I study law, I'm not limited by other constraints. It's just my brain. That's the only thing required.
So my interest is around oppression. And because I am Black and I am woman, essentially trying to recalibrate what our feminism looks like. The standpoint from which I come from, which is the philosophy of Ubuntu, understands me as being a relational being. I also understand Ubuntu to be a system of justice, and the philosophy of Ubuntu to really speak to the fact that a wrong must be rectified.
So I want to be part of the community of activists that when we see an injustice, we call it out and we do everything we reasonably possibly can.
An open society would mean no discrimination. It would mean no fear or favor.
The poor, the marginalized have voiced in terms of the decision that are taken. So for me, an open society is being participatory.
I say this outright with all so much respect that the AU is still a boys' choir, and we need to dismantle that. But I think it has gotten to a point where African youth need to start questioning certain things.
What if we thought about land differently and food as part of that? Let's also think about what
food means, to one's identity.
Why is local government struggling?
I am intrigued by the brilliance of these young people. I'm driven by this altruistic work. I am intrigued by the brilliance of these young people. I'm driven by this altruistic work to imbue them with the gift of education.
I was excited to be part of the Commemorative Scholarship panel because it feels like such a fitting way to commemorate 25 years of OSFSA and also to honor the philanthropy of George Soros.
Scholarship is, I think, is a great enabler. It does make a difference who generates, who creates.
Are we fine? So we just need to know if sound is fine, and I don't know if we have comms with them at the moment. We left the comms over there. So we need to know if we have all.
Ladies and gentlemen, the first cohort of civic leaders for the Open Society Foundation.
I think we can give them a louder applause than that. Come on, guys. So while everybody's shaking George's hand, I just want to thank Mary Jane and Alex Soros for presiding over the announcements. I don't know if everybody knows, but we had said that we would only issue 15 scholarships and 5 fellowships. But the selection panel, which was presided over by Justice Bess Nkabinda, former Justice of the Constitutional Court, pleaded to us to find additional resources because they felt that every single shortlisted applicant, all 20 people you saw today, was so brilliant in their interviews and in their applications. So Justice Nkabinda, we followed your instructions, Judge, and we called our network partners who are all here with us today. And we said, there's this amazing group of young, black, under 35 scholars. Help us fund them. And they all immediately said yes. So I want to thank the network partners. There's too many of you to mention. You are included in the booklet. Really, really, you're going to make a contribution that in 25 years' time, when we're celebrating our foundation, turning 50, that we'll look back on, and I'm sure those 25 leaders will be here on this stage, probably presenting and be working for the foundation. So congratulations, guys, you were all amazing. And Alan and Sedimo really wanted to tell you about a month ago, but we couldn't, so we kept a good secret. So that means that all shortlisted applicants have actually received a scholarship. Now, what does that mean? I think what it means is that we'll be celebrating tomorrow with the scholars now that you are all winners. But each person will receive 350,000 Rand, of which 100,000 Rand is for tuition, textbooks, fees, at a university of your choosing, wherever you get accepted. Each one of you will be hosted by a current or former grantee of ours who have all agreed. Each one of you will obviously nominated by a current or former grantees, and they will host you in return for you pursuing a full-time, postgraduate degree or diploma. It's obviously for 2019 or 2020. We don't want to rush you, but we do want you to graduate. And you will let us know when you graduate so we can put up your certificates in our office. So congratulations. I just want to also add that when George announced his first set of scholarships in 1979, it was for South African black students who wanted to study at the University of Cape Town. And our scholarships and fellowships program gave us, I think, some of the best advice when we conceptualized this program. And they said, choose the most marginalized, the people who cannot get access, who cannot afford higher education. Open it up to refugees and asylum seekers from Africa. Open it up to students from the region and the rest of Africa. And we're very proud that at least 3 of our scholars are actually not South African. So with that exciting news and a bit of, I hope your energy has been lifted, it's really my absolute pleasure to invite my sister from Ghana, Samia Nkrumah, who is the guest speaker for this event, our commemorative lecture on turning 25. She will be in a conversation with my brother, Patrick Gaspard, who's from Haiti, from the US, from South Africa. He's still figuring this out. Patrick, can we call you? And they will be moderated by one of our newest board members, who's a poet, who's an author, a writer, renowned award-winning author, Mandla Langa. The panel will be for about 45 minutes. If you're interested in listening more, then you're going to have to cooperate with us. There'll be no question and answers from the floor, but Mandla will play the role of the provocateur, and he's going to ask the tough questions to Samia and to Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, MC. Can you hear me? First of all, before I even start, I want to say how disadvantaged I feel about not being younger than 25 to get some of these scholarships that... but I would like to thank the MC for the introduction and also recognize George Soros, Alex, and Tomiga, and all, of course, all the other people, the Open Society Foundation family, a global family, and the family locally, or our counterparts. Our family here of OSF, South Africa, is led by Yasmin Karim. I would like to recognize the guest speaker who has already been introduced to all of us here, and that is Samia Nkrumah, Dr. Samia Nkrumah, who agreed to come and grace this event, this very, very important 25 years commemorating the Open Society Foundation in South Africa. The respondent, as we have heard, is Patrick Gaspard, who is in an identity crisis in the sense that he thinks he's an American, whereas we know secretly that he's a South African. And don't be fooled by his accent, because it's what we in South Africa call a lafa, which means a locally acquired foreign accent. On a more serious note, these lectures started 25 years ago with, of course, the inaugural lecture given by George Soros. And I think it's very important to mention what he said about the fact that South Africa is a country in which he saw a lot of promise, much more promise than in terms of the institutions than what was obtaining in Eastern European countries in terms of building institutions, in building an open society. I believe that the process of maintaining a vibrant open society is also due in South Africa to the resilience of our people and the fact that we started at the very beginning to have a leadership that had vision. And the jury is still out whether that vision will still obtain as it is right now, but we have gone through 10 years of a most ruinous leadership, and we are hoping that with the coming into power of a new dispensation, this will also mean a deepening of the democracy that our forebears dreamt about. I would think that it's also instructive that the lecture today is being given by Samia Nkrumah, because we as South Africans, we suffer an affliction, a schizophrenia, where we really do not see ourselves sometimes as being part of the African continent. And I think that some of the insights that Samia Nkrumah will be coming up with will fortunately or fortuitously or hopefully help us connect to the broader family that is the African family, and much more importantly, to the broader, greater world community. I will now hand you over to Samia to speak, and then Patrick will intervene afterwards, and then we will be involved in a dialogue. Thank you, Samia.
Thank you. Shall I keep standing? Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you, South Africa, for having me. Thank you to the Open Society Foundation for inviting me to share this very special moment with you. I was very moved yesterday and today to see and to learn that so many young people have benefited from the work you are doing. So thank you, George Soros and your family. Thank you to all the workers in the Open Society, big and small. I don't know your names, but to every single one of you, we appreciate what you are doing for the young people of South Africa and Africa. I believe today I am a South African to an extent, and I'm extremely moved by being here. You cannot imagine the connection we have with this country and with your struggles. As I was sitting yesterday, I remembered a little incident or experience that I had. In the early 90s, I was studying in London at the School of Oriental and African Studies, part of the University of London. And I remember one day I walked into the cafeteria and I sat to order a coffee or tea, and this youngish man, white, walks in and says, "Let me get you a coffee." And of course, at the time, I couldn't differentiate between one accent and another. I hadn't been long in London at the time. So I said, okay. He got me a coffee, and we are sitting together. And I said, "So where do you come from?" And he said, "I come from South Africa." And what happened to me was unimaginable, because I found myself almost shaking. The blood rushed to my face, and I just got up and left. At the time, I assumed that every white South African must be bad. But that just shows you how we were all with you in the struggle, feeling everything you were feeling. Of course, I learned years later, with experience, with maturity, that there are lots of white South Africans who were part of the struggle to end apartheid. And I also learned that this Pan-African spirit that many of us have, it has nothing to do with your race. African unity, Pan-Africanism is not a racial alignment. And if you allow me to just quote something that Osajifo Kwame Nkrumah, that's my dear father, but we in Ghana, some of us respectfully and affectionately call him Osajifo. Osajifo Kwame Nkrumah. And he said, I'm not an African because I was born in Africa. I'm an African because Africa was born in me. And I believe there are many here today, aside from my dear fellow Africans who are here, but friends of Africa who feel African, who Africa was born in them. So greetings to all of you. From West Africa, my base, from Ghana. Ghana, formerly the Gold Coast, but Ghana became Ghana in 1957 when we became an independent nation. We were one of the very first in the continent to gain our independence from the British. But that happening meant something great, not only to Ghanaians, but really it ushered in, Ghana's independence ushered in a wave of independence struggles and movements and successes. On the eve of our independence, 1957, Ghana's leader, Kwame Nkrumah, mounts the podium to declare that Ghana is free forever. There's excitement, everybody's looking, everybody's waiting to hear what he has to say. And as soon as he says the battle is over, Ghana is free forever, he says something that I'm not sure whether we all understood it at the time. Of course, many of us were not born, but I mean collectively as Ghanaians. And this is what he said. And I quote, "The independence of Ghana is meaningless." Imagine, the day your struggle has ended. The independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of Africa. Yes. I don't know whether we in Ghana understood it at the time, but basically what we were being told is that no African country can enjoy freedom and prosperity separately if it walks or she walks alone. We were being told that we were born and our destiny was closely linked with each other's destiny and development and freedom. And Ghana walked the talk, you know. This wasn't just rhetoric. It wasn't just an announcement on the eve of that great day of independence. It was actually a declaration of intent. Because soon thereafter, there was a flurry of activities in different parts of the continent to rally the different countries, the few independent ones, so that they can help the other nations, the other peoples who are still struggling to gain their independence. So as we speak, I am organizing together with a Pan-African movement. Early December, the 8th of December, we will be organizing to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the All-African People's Conference that took place in Accra on the 8th of December, 1958. And this conference marked the beginning of the coordination between the different states and the different independence or nationalist organizations, including liberation movements, women's groups, youth groups, who met in Accra and pledged to help each other to gain independence or to free ourselves from the different forms of colonialism, including, of course, settler colonialism. And this is partly why I'm here. I'm here to remind myself of that close link. Imagine when our country was newly independent and over 60 organizations met there. And imagine the resolutions that came out of that Congress or conference. Here, from this country, I know there was some representation. From the whole of Southern Africa, I know that that was the beginning of the military or training camps for freedom fighters in Ghana. I know that was the beginning of the issuance of passports, Ghanaian passports, to many Southern Africans so that they can move freely in the continent and beyond to campaign for freedom. And there are so many, many examples of that close collaboration. A few years after that conference, Ghana, under Kwame Nkrumah's leadership, presented a gift to Africa. 1963, on the eve of the founding of the Organization of African Unity. For the first time, an institution that will coordinate our efforts and negotiations to start the long journey to unity. Kwame Nkrumah distributed copies of his book, Africa Must Unite, to the delegates. Now, he echoed what he said in his speeches. Ghana said, there is a way to help us develop quicker. We can't continue to plan our economies separately. We can't continue to build up our military and security separately. We can't continue to hesitate on our positions regarding what's happening all over the world. In fact, a few years earlier, Ghana at the United Nations had called for the total boycott of all South African goods. And it was declared that that is what we were going to do. We led that boycott and we stuck to it. But anyway, that gift or proposal that Ghana gave Africa was a simple one. Political and economic integration is the way forward of the African states You could call it a federation, yes, and why not? We even put in our constitution a clause declaring that we are prepared to surrender our sovereignty to nothing but to further African unity. Now, the deal was simple. We need political unification of African states to manage our economies collectively, collective decision-making, to manage our security, a unified defense position, and to manage our foreign affairs and diplomacy. Aside from these three things, states would have their independent authority to decide on their laws, depending on their customs, tradition, ethnic groups, choices. But basically, we are not talking about surrendering all our sovereignty, but really surrendering that portion of our sovereignty which we could not manage properly. Now that proposal was rejected. It was rejected. We rejected Kwame Nkrumah's proposal, and instead what came out with the founding of the OAU was a diluted form of unity. Let's take the gradualist approach. Let us focus on regional groupings. Let us focus on economic integration and leave out political integration. Now, we've been doing that for the past, 50-odd years, and here we are. In 1997, President Nyerere of Tanzania, the late President Nyerere, came to Ghana, and he said, I want to declare, it's a lovely speech, you can Google it. He said that I was wrong and Kwame was right. Africa must unite, the whole continent. That is what Nyerere said in 1997. But I want to pause a little, and I want to take you a bit forward to how I became interested in this journey of unity. I, as many, have had to experience the negative side of politics. I had the fortune of being associated with a great leader, Kwame Nkrumah. But as a family, I have to admit that we paid a price. It seems a small price now that we've overcome all our obstacles, and now that we are healed of that pain and that fear. I left my country for the first time on the day of the illegal overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah's democratically elected government. And we left Ghana, that is our mother and my siblings. We left Ghana with nothing. We left that same day of the illegal overthrow, and we were uprooted from our home, our culture, our people. And mercifully, we had the good fortune that our parents' marriage was a truly Pan-African one. Our mother came from Egypt. So we were rescued by the government of Egypt, and we went to live in Egypt for several years. We returned 10 years later, more military takeovers. We left again, and it took me decades to return. But one day, I started rereading Kwame Nkrumah's books. And I thought, okay, this struggle is not about an individual. It's not about a country. It's not even about our family or our friends. This is a struggle for the world to become a more humane place. For the last 500 years, the African has been downtrodden. Slavery, colonialism, and even now, marginalization, or if you want to use a term, some of us use what we call neo-colonialism. We are not in full control of our economies. Yes. Kwame Nkrumah wrote an excellent book, Neo-Colonialism. For young people, you must read it too. But I was saying that we know that we've suffered. But now there's an opportunity. You know, we don't want to remain in the same place. Even the strong countries like your dear country, for us, it's a strong country, you know? But even countries like South Africa, I'm afraid you are not reaching your full potential alone. If you look at what you call the credit ratings of this country, you will find that it is what? I think the Moody credit rating has something like BB or BB plus. But anyway, what that means is that it's low. So a country like South Africa, a country like South Korea, which doesn't have the natural and mineral wealth that you have, can borrow at better rates than you. Their credit rating is what? A or AAA. Why, on what basis should your country have a lower credit rating? Why should money be more expensive for you to borrow? If we look at the employment figures, and correct me, you know better than me, but what is the employment rate, the percentage? Recently, 27%? Well, in South Korea, it's 4%. Now, this country can become the hub. From the industrial hub, you could produce cars for the whole continent if a federal government could assume your debts. Each and every one of our countries, if we pool our resources, we would be in a better position economically. And what is that we've heard recently about these xenophobic attacks against other Africans? I don't think that the people of South Africa, who would know the history of African collaboration with your freedom fighters, I don't think you would feel or you would believe that other Africans are your competitors. And I don't think, and I don't believe that the day South Africa can offer reasonable health care, reasonable education, free or at low costs, reasonable basic services, and employment by being that industrial hub that we are all wishing and praying for, I don't think these xenophobic attacks will happen. So what I'm suggesting is that there's a strong economic gain in unity. The way forward for our continent is not to go alone. And in case you are wondering, historically, we were not small units. Historically, we were big kingdoms. The Kingdom of Ghana, the Kingdom of Mali, the Kingdom of Songhai. Africans were not meant to be small, little, economically unviable states. And Africans were not meant to hold on to micro-nationalism. That's not our story. That story was written by somebody else. We want to write our story. I want especially the young people of South Africa, of Ghana, of Togo. Yes, this is especially for you. I want you to write our story and write it well and write it differently. You see, it is true that we didn't come from nothing. We came from great traditions of sacrifice. Our leaders and freedom fighters sacrificed. They might not be perfect, but I'm telling you they sacrificed. I want to tell you another small story. I was born in the great year, we used to call it the Africa year, 1960. 17 countries gained independence. I was born in a beautiful little house on top of a hill in Aburi for my Ghanaian family here. Mother liked the cooler air of the mountains. Now when I was born, she says, our father came with a big bouquet of flowers. And she told him, why? You didn't do that when the boy was born. He said, yes, because this is a girl. This is a girl. And don't forget how women sacrificed alongside the men during the independence struggle. Moreover, he said, in 7 days, we are going to be a republic. Finally, the Queen of England, with all due respect, will not be our head of state, but an African will be our head of state, and we'll have a new constitution. And 10 women will enter parliament under an affirmative action bill. It was called the Representation of People's, the Representation of People's Act, women in brackets. Now, that house our father built with the help of some strong women of his party. After I was born, he decided to give it to the state. He didn't want to own a house. He wanted to lead by example. So mother tells me, those strong women came to demand to see him. And they were so angry. These were his comrades and colleagues. They said, Kwame, so you made us pay taxes to the state? Why are you giving this house back to the state? We wanted you to retire in a quiet place. We wanted you to enjoy your retirements when you cannot continue working. If you had told us, we wouldn't have contributed a peswa. That's our local penny. These women were so mad. But imagine, they contributed with their own money to help their leader buy a house to live in. This is how we sacrificed for each other. And this is how some of our leaders led by example. It is for this reason that when I'm reading Kwame Nkrumah, I am thinking, okay, these are not just words. These people actually walked the talk. And it is instructive for us today when it's very difficult for many, many of us to make sacrifices, small or big. But for us to move from level A to level B, we have to learn how to make small sacrifices. We don't have to give our houses away, but we have to have that mindset, a mindset that is ready to do even the impossible. Now, I want to pay tribute to our women by singling out my dear mother, who I think was very courageous. You see, Africa needs courageous women, revolutionary women. Now, when I talk about revolution, I'm not talking about killings and violence. I'm talking about revolution of the mind, of the consciousness. We can, and as Africans, we can think independently at the highest level. Kwame Nkrumah used to say that you can measure the degree of a country's revolutionary awareness by the political maturity of its women. Are our women ready? Are we mature? Are we revolutionary in the real sense? Yes, we are. So if we are, I have hope for this continent. If we maintain that political maturity, then I know that there is hope. Because obviously, 50% of our population must stand strong behind the other, besides the other 50%. Without the full involvement and participation of women at all levels, change is not going to happen quickly. Change will not happen quickly. Am I exceeding my time? Yes? No, because you can stop me. No, tell me if I've exceeded my time. Oh, I didn't do this. I will wrap up. I don't know whether I've exceeded 20 minutes or not. But I want to wrap up with another story. Today I'm telling you a lot of stories. Now, we are talking about, again, I'm taking you back always. I'm taking you back because I think we need to go back and revisit what has happened, what has inspired us, what has motivated us. It's because of what has happened in the past that I'm here with you today. And I feel at home in your country. Now, in 1957, late 1957, by the end of the year of our independence, Kwame Nkrumah was a bachelor. Now, this was becoming unacceptable in our society. Everybody was saying, get married. Aren't you going to get married? You cannot be the leader, the prime minister, and be single. You have to get married, have children. So being the mind he was, he decided to go for a political marriage. a political marriage that would bring North Africa closer to the rest of Africa. You remember I told you this African unity thing is not a racial arrangement. We are many cultures, many colors, many religions, and we are happy with our diversity. And we have always been advised to digest our different religions, our different influences, our different cultures, and forge out of that, as Kwame Nkrumah told us, the African personality or the Pan-African consciousness. So anyway, those were the days when leaders lived and thought in the same way. So Kwame Nkrumah decides to marry an Egyptian woman out of the blue. Now, I'm told in Ghana, people were quite upset. The women, all these women in Ghana, you are going outside. But that was a political marriage. It was a Pan-African marriage. It was a marriage for a purpose. And at the time, Egyptians had, very few had heard of Ghana. Kwame Nkrumah's friends looking around, searching amongst the Coptic communities for a suitable wife, they met many obstacles. People didn't want to send their daughters to this faraway land that people hardly knew the culture, the language. What do these people eat? What language do they speak? What is the weather like? What do people dress? We cannot send our daughters to this faraway land. But Kwame Nkrumah's friends decided, no, this needs the intervention at a higher level, political intervention. Political marriage needs what? Political intervention. The leader of Egypt at the time calls the family. Do you know who we are talking about? This is the most important leader in Africa. He's a leader who has a plan for this continent. We cannot say no to him. At the very least, we'll organize a little low-key visit. We'll send your daughter with a delegation because we are going to open an embassy in Accra. And nobody will hear about this visit, if things don't work out. But at least the Ghanaians would have said, yes, we did our duty. We collaborated. Mother goes with her uncle and a small delegation. The Embassy of Egypt is opened for the first time in Accra, in Ghana, the capital of Ghana. Mother meets this man, Kwame Nkrumah, at the airport. The most charming man I've ever met, she says. Mind you, they don't speak the same language. They had to use dictionaries to communicate and interpreters. They sit together for 2 hours with their dictionaries, and they decide there and then to get married. They got married that first day. So that was destiny. The marriage worked and produced 3 loyal African citizens. I want to pay tribute, as I said, to my mom, because I think she was very courageous to go to another country, another people. But that means that spirit that knows that there is something that is linking all of us together, that Pan-African spirit is still there in us. And Kwame Nkrumah described or defined Pan-Africanism as an objective to be reached, an objective, not a movement, not a doctrine. There are many descriptions, many definitions, but I want to give you the Nkrumah's definition. He defined it as the total liberation and unification of Africa. Yes, liberation and unification. We gained political independence as the first step to reconstruct our societies, bring about fairness, social justice, eliminate poverty, industrialize. We didn't gain our independence to hoist the flag or play the national anthem only. No, we had plans. Political independence, and then economic emancipation. But we are beginning to realize we will not do this unless Africa unites. So to my young people especially, I want you to consider this. Our future lies in unification. If we are going to achieve the objectives of our liberation, then we have to unite. We are halfway through. We are not going to make it alone and separately. I want you to imagine a federation of African states, unified economies or integrated, unified foreign policy, unified defense, not foreign bases, a Pan-African army with a high command. I want you to dream and imagine that. 1.5 billion people negotiating for better deals and better conditions for their people. Africa and the diaspora, 1.5 billion people. Wouldn't you want to be part of that nation? Yes. So Africa must unite. Africa must unite. Africa must unite. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samia, for this very inspirational message that's going straight to our young people, because 25 years of our democracy, 25 years of Open Society Foundation in South Africa, there's a coincidence there, and I think we should take it to heart. I was going to be asking questions, but I think what I will do is I will go straight to Patrick and get him to respond to Samia's as succinctly and as briefly as possible. And then we will see how we work out this, this evening. Thank you.
Am I on? Thank you so very much, my very big brother. And thank you, Samia, for those stirring set of remarks and the provocations within those remarks that I'm now compelled to respond to. But before I respond in any way, I just want to very quickly acknowledge the scholarship recipients who were on this stage earlier today. We're having a conversation that really takes as its origin a notion that we had, that we could, perhaps as your elders, provide something of a compass for you as you move forward beyond this City Hall to go back into the task at hand of renewing the pledge of your Constitution and really lifting us all up. So this is about you, this is for you. You have an incredible responsibility. You saw Mary Jane on this stage earlier. You understand what the consequence was of George Soros's decision in 1979 to advance a bursary to Mary Jane and what's become of that. Now the question is, what are you going to do with the very same opportunity? We understand that, as Fanon told us, that each generation out of relative obscurity has an opportunity to fulfill its mission or betray it. We know that you will fulfill yours admirably, and we stand ready to partner with you and support you throughout that mission. Samia, as you were speaking, I was furiously taking notes on my iPad, and I thought that in the tradition of South African respondents, I would go through every plank. But since you managed to, well, first, an Nkrumah can never exceed her time, so you need not worry about that. but clearly, my time will be more limited, so I won't go through it all. And since you managed to deliver your remarks without notes, I'll try to walk on the tightrope without a safety net as well. One is, of course, inspired by any call for unity, and Ghana, for many of us and the Pan-African diaspora, will always be the black star in our firmament. African Americans in particular know that W.E.B. Du Bois died in Ghana and was taken in at a time when he was cast out and rejected by his own land. So Ghana is a special place for us. And your father told all of us that we must all unite or suffer. It's very stark terms. And your call is compelling, but I wonder, as we have this conversation and as we're interviewed, how we take this conversation from a kind of romanticism, which I find as a would-be poet very attractive, but steep that romanticism in the reality of struggle and the reality of the work that we all must take on, while also holding on to our African imagination. Our chair of our West African board from Senegal, Felwine Sarr, is a remarkable economist and poet who wrote an extraordinary book, Afrotopia, we should all read. Felwine reminds us all about the need to take up Wole Soyinka's sense of self-apprehension, and a notion that in this incredibly challenging time that Africans have to reimagine ourselves in order to represent ourselves and project ourselves effectively. But the reality also is that we're at a time that irrespective of the wonderful headlines that we received from The Economist in 2011 when they projected Africa rising because of the 5.4% growth in GDP over the previous decade, since then, we've had, I think, probably about 2.2% collective GDP growth since that moment. And we are at a time where 7 African countries rank among the top 20th of the nations with the greatest disparities within their borders, with the industrialized nation of South Africa that we all love standing at the very top of that chart, with 3 billionaires in South Africa controlling the wealth of 50% of the population at the very bottom. When you talk about the call that Kwame Nkrumah made at the inception of the Organization of African Unity, you talked about the need for political integration. He did not touch on cultural integration, which was interesting at the time. And you also talked about the need for economic integration. There was a failing of leadership in that one moment, but that failing continues. And it's been repeated, and everything old is new again. We're now finding ourselves in the middle of a process in Addis, where there is there's a push for reform around economic integration. We know in about 30 years' time that Africa will represent a quarter of all of humanity. So that call for renaissance and for integration is absolutely positively critical, but it's not new. In 1985, 1986, the Organization of African States paused and said, we have put all this emphasis on political integration, political renewal, to the neglect of our economic integration. Let's focus on it then. Reports were issued, there were meetings at the United Nations, and then everybody went back to their own corners and repeated the mistakes of the past. This was renewed again after the Abuja Accords in 1991. We saw a similar call after the end of the OAU and the beginning of the African Union in 2003, same reports being issued and being dusted off the shelves. So your call is a compelling one. It seizes all of us, seizes the imagination, makes us lean into our own notion of self-apprehension. And thank you for reminding all of us, especially the young people here, as Amilcar Cabral reminded us, that our history did not begin at the moment that the colonizers began their adventures in our lands. But as we open this up and have the conversation, it's going to be fascinating to think about the practical implications, particularly since regional integration has struggled because of a desire amongst hegemons on the African continent to be advantaged in any negotiations. So I think that, I hope that we're going to have an opportunity to talk through that very real politique, to unpack that, and to move up beyond the poetry, which I'm loath to do, and to move into some of the hard politics here. So I promised that I would be brief so that we could take up the conversation in as fulsome a way as possible. But I want to not leave the impression that there's a cynicism that I have about the possibility of integration. I think it's absolutely necessary, especially when you consider circumstances like in Senegal, where if you have a truck in the south of Senegal and you need to get your goods to north of Senegal, you can't even drive through the Gambia, and you have to take a circuitous route that increases prices, that has implications for food security and delivery. And it's insane that if you build an automobile here in South Africa, which you do, that it costs you more to get that vehicle to Nigeria than it does to get that vehicle to the United States. That's absolutely incomprehensible. So, so it's going to be fantastic to hear in the most practical terms how we address those issues. And thank you so very much for your brilliance and for your warm welcome to all of us in the diaspora.
I think the question that comes building on what Patrick is asking in terms of the practicalities of this integration, this Pan-African unity. For me, I would like to distill it, to bring it down to a very cynical observation, which has got nothing to do with this, and that is the observation that at the political level, it's sometimes very difficult for states to have the integration that we would like to see, or the one that you are positing. I think there's a lot more possibility of cooperation among criminal syndicates, really, across, we used to, when we were in Zambia in exile, there was a lot of activity of connections between the car thieves that operated from South Africa all the way to what was then called Zaire. But I do believe that it's always important for us as a people to keep having that hope, that trust, and working on the possibility for that kind of unity. Earlier on today, we were talking about some of the cooperations that we think can happen, and I do believe that at another level, perhaps not at the state level, perhaps in terms of, for instance, institutions, organizations coming together, having a common vision and seeing the extent to which they can collaborate across the Pan-African landscape. And you touched also on the question of women, which is very important. I have to say this, otherwise my wife is going to really beat me up and say I did not. But jokes aside, I do believe that there's a lot more possibility for women's bodies, women's institutions, women's organizations to have the kind of collaboration where a common language is spoken across many of these borders, which are incredibly artificial. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Okay. No, the first thing that comes to mind is, yes, it is tempting to think that this is a sentimental dream, this whole unity issue. But actually, that's the same thing we were told when we were fighting for independence. You know, there were situations which seemed impossible to change. Even at the time, our strength, I mean, it was unimaginable. If you take the case of Ghana, it's unimaginable that Ghana would have defied Great Britain. But it does happen. It begins with the people, because all these suggestions are actually political. They are political projects. So we are not talking about just sentiments and feelings. We are talking about journeys that begin with conviction, with sacrifices, and things do change. Now, if you think of all what it would take for us to become economically integrated, let's think about that. Having a common currency, even 2 or 3 countries, I want to ask this question. Is that not a political decision? I mean, who will decide if the borders go down or remain as they are? Is that not a political decision? So what we are saying is, it would be easier to have integration with some political understanding, but it will be a very lengthy project to try and do it just based on economics. You see, this is a political project we are talking about. Take the example of Ghana. In Ghana, before independence, we were 4 different territories. In Ghana, we speak about what? I mean, they say 70 languages. I mean, I know of 12 or so, but there are more. There are sub-languages, you know? Different religions, different ethnic groups. But when we decided, the majority decided, through a referendum, through elections, that we want to be reborn as the nation of Ghana, the decision was taken. Elections, referenda, plebiscites, you name it. But these are political decisions. You know, ultimately, they are political decisions. So I just want us to open our minds and hearts to the fact that before changes, big changes happen, there's a political process. So what might seem like a dream today, sitting here, chatting in this hall, could become a reality. It's a political process. But most decisions for integration, even economic ones, we'd have to go to the political negotiating table to have them, you know, agreed upon. That's what I'm suggesting.
Thank you. Patrick?
You're right, and there's the rub, and there's the rub, and I wonder sometimes when we have the conversation about integration, the Pan-Africanist notion of integration. Sometimes I wonder whether or not we have taken the values out of the conversation. When George Soros starts our network. And he launches into his philanthropy, it's in fits and starts, but he names it the Open Society Foundation for a reason, right? He's projecting a value into the world that's going to be a unifying approach and unifying theory of the case, and then you understand that the interventions that you make on healthcare, on access to education and economic inclusion are all being made through that one particular value set. There was a time when the Pan-Africanist model was values-driven, but it had a particular urgency because of the need to struggle together towards independence, right? So we get to the end of independence, the end of the struggle for independence on the continent in 1994, right? When South Africa is the very last domino to fall. But in the intervening years, from the inception of the notion, the vision, the institutionalization of it to the very end, independence was the overarching, unifying theory of the case, with economics being, I think, a very, very distant cousin of independence. Post-94, the economic case has not been made I think, in one that it has not been made through a values lens. It's been made, I think, in much the same way that we talk about the value of integration for the European Union, right? At some point, integration for the European Union meant the end of war, the end of World War. But it became increasingly more and more about economy. And I think now in Africa, when we talk about integration, when we have the conversations in Addis about integration, it's about benefit. It's vaguely about mutually shared prosperity. Civil society is not really engaged and involved in the conversation at all. Chambers of commerce are very, very involved in the conversation. And there's a sense that integration is all about the free flow of goods and services. It's not about the elimination of disparities. So I think that value, if that value is lifted up and reintroduced as a fundamental plank of Pan-Africanism in the second half of the 21st century, that has a very different political motive force to it and integrates the spirit of civil society and gives us all an opportunity to build, I think, some effective policy legs around the notion of eliminating disparity versus making it much easier for Facebook and General Motors to do business across the continent and making it easier for Dangote to be able to get on an airplane to sell his concrete to another part of the continent.
I think we have opened our society to ideas this evening. I believe that Samia came up with very, 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 I would think, groundbreaking, provocative ideas that do mean that we need to take them and find a way to put them in our collective pot and cook them and see the extent to which this stew can enrich us. And I do believe that it's a conversation that cannot seriously find conclusion here. It's something that we do need to take away from here and discuss, workshop, and see the extent to which it can also fit into our own vision of what the different levels, the different formations insofar as civil society is concerned. I want to thank you immensely, Samia, for having come so far to share your ideas with us and to say that something you said is very, very important, and that is that you are not, or paraphrasing what Kwame Nkrumah said about not being in Africa, but Africa being in him. I think we didn't come to South Africa. South Africa is you. You are South Africa, and we are very proud and very happy, and want to thank you for coming here. Patrick, thanks so much for having enriched this dialogue, this conversation. And I do believe that we would have extended it to you to ask questions, but sometimes it's better that we find a forum out of here to discuss more on what Samia has given us. I want you to give my sister here a round of applause. Yeah. And I want to ask also to thank Patrick for having enriched us today. Thanks to the young people who are the recipients of our possibility for a livable future. Thank you.
We're almost done. I'd like to call our board chairperson, Yasmin Karim, to do a vote of thanks and the closing.
Thank you. I won't keep you long. I know I want to end while it's still Friday. And before you all hit the long street bars and parties, but I thought that the topic of Samia's lecture is a very appropriate one, 25 years in our own democracy. The world out of our borders, out of the African borders, is becoming more hostile for Africa and Africans and people of color, and actually people who may be of a paler hue but who have Africa in them. And it might be an appropriate time for us to revisit the call for us to unite and start finding an African identity where we share political and economic interests that promotes our own human rights. I think we cannot think about unity without thinking about an expansion of human rights on the continent, because that is also a failure that we sometimes forget to put in the equation when we talk about one Africa. So thank you, Samia, for your critical thoughts delivered with charm and grace. And perhaps one day we'll have you as an ambassador of the continent. And perhaps, as Mandla has challenged us as open society, that this might be a new way to formulate and think about what we do in the next 10 years, thinking about it, the issue of African identity, African development, and perhaps opening our minds to that idea together with you, our grantees, and perhaps starting to explore civil societies, cooperative mechanisms of civil society across the continent. And this might be something, Fatima, that I will speak to Mr. George Soros about as soon as I get off this podium after I have thanked all of you for attending. So let me do my bit and say to you, first of all, thank you all for spending your Friday evening with us and listening to these interesting conversations. I just want to say that today was an incredible day for us. It was incredible in listening to our grantees' debates at the office, looking at the exhibitions, and feeling an immense pride and joy of 25 years of celebrating a vision of an open society. So thank you, Fatima, and first and foremost, thank you for all the grantees who attended and participated. Thank you, Fatima, and the staff of OSFSA for pulling together an incredible event that has been moving and inspiring. Thank you to the Soros family. for coming down. And we know that it's been a long journey to get here, both figuratively and, what was the other word? Metaphorically. And so I think that, thank you for coming, George. I know it's something that you've been looking forward to, and I hope it has been rewarding. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Tamika. And for the global board members for supporting us and giving us encouragement and a lot of advice in the programs we are thinking of. So thank you so much. And for our partners in the network, from East Africa, from OSISA, Southern Africa, Regional Director Muthoni, our network partners from all over the world, thank you for coming and supporting us in this precious time and celebrating with us. If I have left anybody out, I'm sorry. It's late now. We all have to go home. Thank you.